Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be drawing this house mouse in colour pencil, and I'm going to be using Pastelmat, and this is a new surface for me, so I'm going to give you my first impressions too. I really hope you enjoy the video. I'm beginning with the eye of the mouse, and I've actually got a more detailed video of this on my channel, so I'm going to leave that in the iCards above so you can link to watch that video in real-time clips. But just briefly, I'm going in with the dark sepia Polychromos pencil for an outline, and then just paying close attention to the details in the eye, specifically in the highlights where there's a little bit of the sky showing, before going in with the darker black to finish it off, just to give that glazed look. With Pastelmat, I found that you can go over with lighter colours over the top of dark, which is fantastic. I'm really loving this texture so far. Now I'm just outlining with the dark sepia the outline of the eye. On an animal, there's always a little gap around the eye before you get to the fur, so making sure that I'm mapping that in. And I'm going in with a light colour to begin with, just as a base colour, so the lightest colour that I can see, and then just filling in some of the paper. Some of the Pastelmat's quite grainy, so filling in not quite the tooth, but just having a base layer down before I go in any with the darker colours. I'm using a combination of the Caran Luminance pencils and the Polychromos, and a little bit of the Caran Pablos, which I have only a few colours of. You can see the granite rose there, and I'm just going in and I'm mapping out the direction of the fur. I'm adding a little bit of colour to the nose there before going in with the darker colours, and then using the nugget and the bistre just to make sure that I go from light to dark, building up the shadows and building up the layers of the fur, because fur in reality, in nature, has a lot of layers, and so you need to replicate that with your pencils by going in and starting off with lighter colours and then going in with the darker colours, adding the shadows, and then able to glaze over the top with different colours, maybe a little bit of yellow or brown. I'm adding a little bit of detail now around the nose and darkening up some of the pinker areas, just so that I know where I'm going with this. Darkening up using the bistre, the Van Dyke brown, and then going in with the ochres and the umbers as well, just to make sure that I add lots of depth of colour. In this mouse, you can see there are lots of different browns, lots of different tones to this fur, and so it's important that you just take your time and really observe that reference photo. Have a look to see which colours you can see. You don't have to exactly match the colour, but just having a kind of semblance of which colour that you're going for. In this case, it was kind of a reddy orangey brown as opposed to a kind of grey brown. So my overall colours were going to be the yellowy browns and the orangey browns with a little bit of red, so I'm using some siennas as well. So you can see here that I don't get much detail with the first few layers, and that's on purpose. And Pastelmat, I've got to say, this is the first time I've ever used it, so it was a little bit of trial and error as well. I was going in and I was just mapping out the direction of the fur with the lighter colours, and then hoping that I would be able to get some detail later on down the line, which you can with the smoother papers. I'm used to using the Fabriano Artistico paper, and this is what I was doing. What I didn't realise, I have heard other artists say this, but what I didn't realise was that you can add light over dark, and it really does show up nicely, much better than I was anticipating. So I knew after a little bit of practice that further on down the line, you can see I'm adding here a little bit of white over the top, so I could then add some of the highlights on top of the dark shadows if I needed to. So again, just going in with the layers, I'm using very, very small pencil strokes because this mouse's fur was very short. If it was longer fur, like under the chin, there was a little bit of longer fur, then you use longer pencil strokes. Just mapping out the ears, and again going from light to dark, so just using the pencils very, very lightly to begin with. I'm going in and looking to see what are the darkest colours that I can see, adding one layer, and then using a softer pencil like a Luminance pencil to blend those colours together, to lose some of the graininess of the paper, to smooth it out, because there were parts of the mouse that did have a smoother texture, like the inside of the ear where that pink part is. So it was important to smooth that out, blend the colours together, before going in with a little bit more detail and then the final layers of detail towards the end. So just mapping out that second ear and going in and looking at the darkest points on that ear, sometimes taking a little stand back. Sometimes what I like to do is just kind of relax your eyes and then you can see the contrast between the shadows and the highlights, which is much more important in realism than getting the colours absolutely correct. It's much more important to get your values right, your lights and your darks, and the kind of tones of the mouse. So if I was going to completely get rid of the browns, and if I decided to do this mouse orange or purple, then it wouldn't matter. It would still look real. It would obviously look purple, but it would still look real, which is the key to this. So as the mouse's fur went down the body, around the arms, the little kind of paw area, it got longer in fur strokes, so therefore my pencil strokes were longer too. And just going in with some of the greys, forming the shadow under the chin, darkening up a little bit with the dark sepia, and then using a mixture of the cold greys and the warm greys to just make it look a little bit more realistic. The cool greys have a bluer tone and the warm greys have a bit of a browner tone, so sometimes it's quite good to mix them so that you don't get a real strong colour either way, because if you're layering them up, sometimes it can look a little bit too blue, a little bit too cold, or obviously if you're using the warmers it can look a bit muddy and a bit brown. So using the combination is a really good way of balancing them out. And then going in with the Pablo, just a very, very light colour, the cream, and then going in with the browns again, layering up. I'm looking at the patterns of the fur here in the body, because it's quite a big area of fur to work on. I'm working in little tiny sections and then mapping out where the patterns are. There's some little darker lines and there's definitely a darker stripe all the way down the back. So I was just mapping that out so I know where that is, and then it's a map for going forward, you know where you need to go. It's also a good checkpoint. You think, oh, if I've drawn that in the right place, then you can check to see where the patterns are and that you know that you're then going in the right way, going the right direction. I've got some acid-free paper here that I'm resting my hand on to try not to smudge, because I've heard with Pastelmat that it's quite easy to do, to kind of muddy up and dirty the paper really, really easily. But I found with having this little bit of paper, it didn't smudge at all. And in fact, I found it smudged a lot less than when I use my normal smooth paper. And I don't know if that's because I was being a little bit more cautious, because I've heard that it can smudge, or whether the tooth of the Pastelmat actually holds on to the colour a little bit more. That could be another reason for it. So just going in with the next section now, mapping in the direction and the pattern of the fur, and then adding a little bit more detail, going darker with my browns. I'm using the umbers and the there you go, the dark sepia, some greys in there as well, and then making sure that I add that orange glow. I'm using the terracotta in the Polychromos, which glazed over the fur really nicely, and then I found that actually it could use a little bit more orange up towards the face and around the paws, and so you will see I'll go in with the burnt siennas and use the terracotta colour to glaze over the top of some of the parts that I've already worked on. Sometimes you find that you haven't seen a colour for a while and then suddenly you find it in your kit again and it's the perfect colour, and you tend to then go back over the whole of your drawing and add some more of that colour in, just because it works so well. And as you move on through the drawing, you'll find techniques that work, and then you can replicate them as you go on. It's muscle memory too. You'll find by the end of the drawing you've already done things a couple of times, you've seen what works, and then you can just carry on with those techniques through the rest of the drawing. Moving on to the little back paws there, and just mapping out the shadows and the darkest parts of the shadow of the underbelly there, just to make sure that I know where I'm going. By this point in the drawing, usually my initial sketch has probably rubbed off, so you can't really tell. I can't anyway. I don't tend to go back in and draw it in because it would be too dark then. So most of the time I'm just using the reference points of the rest of the drawing to work out where these things need to be. So just going in with some browns and adding lots of different colours to the underbelly. It's not just one block colour. I've used about 30 to 40 different colours on this drawing. Darkening up some of the shadows. It's hard to tell how dark you need to go until you've got some of the rest of the drawing in. So that's why you tend to see some artists jump backwards and forwards and then darkening up things some more, because you can tell, because tone is relative. Until you've got something next to it, you can't tell how dark you need to go. And it's always better to start light and go darker towards the end without going too dark to begin with and having to rub it out and not possibly being able to. It does tend to leave a little bit of a stain on the paper. So just mapping in the tail there, going in with some different pinks. I'm using the Caran Pablo pencils as well as the Polychromos here, some lovely pinks, flesh tones, and lots of different greys and browns too. So mapping out the feet, blending the smoother parts of the skin with the Luminance pencils, adding a little bit of shadow to make sure that it's got some kind of context on the paper, that it looks like it's actually sitting on the top of the paper, and just mapping in the paws. I found with this, I went over the paws with the lightest colour that I could see, which was a very, very pale whitey cream colour, and then mapped in the shape of the little, what would you call them? It wouldn't be fingers, would they? Little digits on the mouse's paw with the darker colour. Mapped out around it the little bit of something that he was resting on. It was a little bit of metal on a stand or something, so I could draw around the little digits of the paw, and then I could darken them up when I needed to, just to get a little bit more depth and colour into the paws. And after some final adjustments, the mouse is complete. I really enjoyed this little chap, and I loved using Pastelmat for the first time. I'm definitely going to be using it again. And there he is. I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, it'd be great if you could like and subscribe and press that bell icon so you're notified of future videos. And I look forward to seeing you next time.